And now I'll call the Snoqualmie City Council meeting to order. All please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Councilmember Jeans, can you please lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Unless the city clerk, please take the roll call.
Councilmember Jeans?
Here.
Councilmember Ross?
Here.
Councilmember Holloway?
Here.
Councilmember Mayhew?
Here.
Councilmember Lissay?
Here.
Councilmember Sundwall? Is not here. And Councilmember Shepherd?
Here.
And Mayor Larson?
I am here. Councilmember Sunwall is off traveling in Europe at this time. You probably see nice photos from Switzerland as we speak. Can I have a motion and a second to excuse Councilmember Sunwall?
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second to excuse Councilmember Sunwall. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. May I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Any discussion? Councilmember Shepherd.
I would like to take the warrants off the consent agenda.
Okay, warrants are off. Councilmember Jeans?
I'd like to add to the agenda to the Council of the Whole regarding the second town hall meeting.
Okay. Councilmember Shepherd.
I'd also like to add to the Council of the Whole my questions from last council meeting that weren't answered.
All right.
Point of order,
I'm going to
Mayor?
step back to Councilmember Jeans first and ask, is there a majority in favor of adding the town hall discussion to the committee of the whole?
No.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
All right, that one's going to be added. Councilmember Shepherd, you wanted to, I'm not sure what questions you're speaking about.
Yeah.
Council in favor of adding these 5 questions?
1,000 was coming from. Another question had to do with the pressure zone modification project. This project came in at 400,000 under budget. I want to know where the difference is going to in the budget. And as the pedestrian activated signal, I had questions about, for downtown, I had questions about, they went through a process for design and they spent some money before they knew whether this was going to be approved by WSDOT or not, and I wanted to understand the order of operations as far as when they were doing the design versus figuring out whether that was the best direction to go. Basically, those are the questions.
Is council in favor of adding these questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
All right.
Friendly suggestion, may we take those up in Public Works meeting next week? That's probably an appropriate venue and appropriate time that we have time to have the discussion you're looking for.
I'm sure Jody has that on the Public Works agenda, or Public Works Committee agenda. All right. Any other items for the agenda? Councilmember Mayhew?
Just two of those questions sounded like they were F&A committee questions, so maybe they could be added to the agenda for F&A committee.
All right, we'll take a look at those. Right, yeah, Councilmember Mayhew, we'll take a look and determine which agenda to put those on then.
Worst case, I'm in both committees and I'll report out in F&A.
Any other items for the agenda? Okay, with the town hall item added to the committee of the whole and warrants moved, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Aye. Okay, motion carries with those amendments. And now we move on to public hearings, presentations, proclamations, and appointments. And it's my pleasure at this point to invite the folks from the YMCA, our partners there, Nate Smith, if you want to come forward. Give us, I think your promise to the council at the retreat was you would be happy to provide some financial information about the operations of our Y.
Yeah, exactly. So back at the council retreat, we had the conversation about providing a high-level overview of the financial operations of the facility. So that was part of the packets. I don't know if it's going to be on the screen or if you have it in front of you, but give it a minute maybe.
Mark, do we have that
Might help.
presentation to throw up there? Not Platt, the YMCA financial. There's the link right there,
The doc right there.
unless you have it open already. Perfect.
Great, awesome. So Before I go into the numbers, because I know that's where everyone's eyes are going to go first, I wanted to kind of set the stage on two different quick items.
Sorry, Nate, can you guys blow that up a little bit? Thanks, Nate, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So the first one is really why are we here tonight talking about this and kind of sharing this information. And so really the goal was as partners who have had a long relationship together to spend some time having a high overview conversation about the operations and just having a good sense that as a partner and a steward of the facility that we're meeting kind of the due diligence that we have of doing that in a appropriate manner. And then secondly, I wanted to make sure that we understood that what we're looking at here on the screen and what was in your packets is everything tied to the facility itself. So this does not include anything that's going to be run off of the campus someplace else that might be tied to the Snoqualmie Valley YMCA as a whole, but rather just what's presented at the facility itself. So with those two notes, quickly going down through the main categories. As you can see, membership is about $1 million and 1.1 million of revenue in 2018. Contributions being our fundraising efforts to support programs across the community, being 131,000. Other revenue being 480,000, and that can be a mixture of the following things like summer camp that's happening at the facility, childcare happening at the facility, youth sports happening at the facility. Well, payroll being a little over 1.1 million. That includes benefits and taxes and such. Other expenses being service fees, utilities, other expenses, and association allocations for our total of those expenses being 568,000. And I'll talk briefly about what's kind of in those categories to give you a general sense. Starting with services fees, that's really banking, credit card charges in terms of processing payments, janitorial, outside vendors that we use for like gymnastics and things like that sort of fall into that kind of category. Utilities being pretty self-explanatory is what's there. Other expenses would be really like supplies, maintenance, and equipment costs under $5,000. And then association allocations, that's really where we see the association's support on the back end of the work that we do. So that's everything from IT, HR, training, marketing, accounting, communications, all of those things, because we don't carry any of those staff or departments at the branch itself. Those are all association staff that help support the work that we do. Going down below that's kind of the differential between all those things. Below all of that is the depreciation expense of the facility itself and other equipment that's in the building. So that's, again, equipment and furniture in the building itself for the depreciation. And then lastly is the association support. So the difference, so what to think about on that particular one is that's more infrastructure and systems oriented. So the association allocations, that's really going to be staffing that's supporting the operations directly. The association support, those are dollars that are supporting the infrastructure, whether that, again, that'd be like systems that are processing things, that's IT investments, that's all that kind of backbone system structure. And then you can see the net down at the very bottom when you kind of put all that together. So that's a quick overview. As we mentioned at the council retreat, kind of keeping it high level, but that's a snapshot of what's happening at the facility currently in 2018.
Great, thank you. Any questions? Councilmember Shepherd.
So you're running at a $100,000 deficit? Has that been consistent in prior years, or?
Yeah, so I mean, so we're fully, obviously, the depreciation expense being part of that, but, we've had growth over the years and in a variety of programming and revenue streams. And so I can't speak to the year over year going back to the beginning of time, but it's going to be in that range.
How long can you sustain running at a deficit? You probably don't know, right?
Yeah, I'm not going to have an answer for you on any of those kind of long-term conversations. And I would suggest that we look closer more at the net from operations as the number that really defines the operations as a whole, and not get too stuck up on the bottom number there.
What covers that deficit, Nate?
What do you mean? What covers the deficit?
You haven't come to us asking for $100,000 of help every year.
Right.
And you're not, I assume, accumulating a massive debt.
Correct.
locally.
Right,
So
we're
is
not-
that covered out of the regional system?
Well, so, yeah, so you remember that what we're showing here on this sheet is just for what's happening in the facility itself. We have a variety of programs that happen all across this valley that are not tied to the facility. And so when you start to add those things back into the equation, that changes the numbers. Secondly, the regional approach, the association approach that we have here for our operations is also part of what kind of sustains the long-term viability of our operations, whether here or in our other facilities across the region.
How does this compare?
Councilmember Ross?
So I thank you for sharing the financials, because it doesn't, our agreement does not require you to share them with the city. But at this time that we're considering expanding the community center, I appreciate you're showing us these. It shows that the maintenance and operations, you're covering those. You're also required to cover any future capital equipment or the roof or furnace like that. And so it shows that you are covering those expenses, and you do have the backing of the Seattle Y financially as well. So, thank you.
You're welcome, thanks.
All right. Any other questions? Councilmember Lissay?
You mentioned other programs in the valley, so it's not a full reflection of the WISE operations. Are those operations, those things, other activities in the valley run from the Snoqualmie location, or they run somewhere else?
So what we show here is what's actually ran at the facility itself.
But then it's not really I guess what I'm trying to get at is that, I guess I'm getting the same question as the mayor had, which is, how do you run a business at a $100,000 loss if you aren't asking for more money?
Right, and so the point, so if we separate that into two quick responses, one being the purpose of showing the financials in the way that we've lined them up here is to have a good sense for everyone of what the operations of the facility itself look like. If the Y was no longer going to be there, this is generally what you could be looking at in terms of operating the facility. And so that's why we've lined it up in the way that we have. Secondly, to answer your question, is the variety of programs that we have across the valley, including summer camp that's off-site and childcare that's off-site and so on, is what makes up that difference.
So it's not a reflection of the, I don't want to use profit and loss characterizations, but it's not a reflection of the financial viability of the YMCA as a whole, but as this is just a reflection of the costs that run through the actual hard bricks and mortar facility.
Correct,
Okay.
yes.
That's what I wanted to understand.
Several of those programs around the valley predated this community center, correct?
Correct, right. And so, again, part of the reasoning being is that the programs that we offer in these other locations ran prior to the facility and will continue to do those for years to come, regardless of expansion or otherwise. And so the reason that we keep those separate out in this financial overview is that, again, to the mayor's point, those predate the facility itself.
Councilmember Mayhew?
So if I'm reading this right, your operating and maintenance, this is your operating and maintenance for the year, 2018. You spent about 1.8 million running that community center. So in the revenue side, 1.8 million, that, how much of that came from the city? How much of that is city taxes?
That's $0.
So this is all being done the M&O is being done at no cost to the taxpayers of Snoqualmie.
That is correct.
Good question. Good answer.
So Nate, one of the criticisms of a private nonprofit running a city community center is then it's more exclusive. It's no longer accessible to the general public as a community center would be. Can you speak to your policies on that?
Yeah, so if we reflect back to my presentation in January, talking about the financial assistance that we provide to all folks throughout our community, that's a value, core value of the Y is that no one's turned away for the inability to pay, and that we're going to make it affordable for all folks who want the opportunity to take advantage of the offerings that we provide. So we feel like it's done in an extremely high-level way where folks have the opportunity to have access and work with us to figure out how that works for them, and so that, in fact, the whole community does have the ability to take part in what we're offering.
Well, I recently had a conversation with her. I know I challenged that sort of policy by giving a scenario. I mean, like my wife and I, when our 4 kids were in private schools in 1 year, and it was a considerable amount of money, we could barely afford macaroni and cheese, much less other things. And I said, well, on paper, the salary looks good, but the situation is pretty tight. you said in those circumstances that again, you take that policy seriously and would make those considerations.
Right. I mean, because we work with, everybody who comes through the front door. We work with to meet them where they're at. And, we do not require income verification as part of the financial aid process. And so it's just through a conversation to understand those type of things, where a family might be on paper might be different in reality. And so we work with them to figure that out.
Councilmember Shepherd and Councilmember Mayhew.
So I know at the retreat you talked about.
Councilmember Shepherd, if you could use the microphone.
At the retreat, you talked about several surveys that you did of current membership and their level of interest as far as having a pool at the YMCA. And to go along with that bit of information at our coffee at the YMCA, there was one resident who said that she is hearing that some members are a little concerned about additional cost for membership if a pool is added. What will be the impact of membership cost if a pool is added?
Yeah, so if we look at our operations agreement that we currently have, there is language in there as to what the membership dues structure looks like with a full facility. And so the expectation is that we would move towards a full facility cost like we do across all of our YMCAs across the region. But with the full understanding that this financial assistance model continues to be available, so we shouldn't see that be as a large blocker for folks having access.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask the question of Nate, but I'm not sure if he's going to know the answer, and maybe city staff would know the answer. But my question is this. So 1.8 million and 1.7 or 1.8 million in services, not a cost to the taxpayer. Just following up on your point, Mayor, about people who have difficulty affording membership and the things that the Y does to get them access anyway. Am I right that we're the city, for example, running this themselves, that they would be much more limited in the ability to do that because you get into gift of public funds type issues? Is that a correct understanding that there's difficulty doing what they do when you're a municipality?
Doing what they do in terms of
Adjusting dues for those who may not be able to afford it.
Well, the city has an ability to provide for low-income residents. We have discounted rates for low-income and disabled folks in our utility rates. So you might be able to do something like that, but you couldn't necessarily do it across the board. That process that's in the utility rates requires some documentation of income and so on. And the kind of subsidy program that what I thought I just heard described doesn't depend on people coming to the Y and showing their finances and demonstrating an inability to pay.
So my understanding that they're able to do more in this respect or do it more simply is probably an accurate understanding?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think they have a lot more flexibility in enabling volunteers and doing things we otherwise would not with unions and prevailing wages issues and so forth. So they can actually do a lot more, I think, with less in that regard, more freedom. Any other questions, council, or comments?
Thanks, Nate.
Nate, thank you so
Thanks for
much.
having me, guys.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks.
All right, with that, we move on to citizens' comments. At this time, we'll provide an opportunity for citizens to comment. First, a few ground rules. Snoqualmie citizens who are not present have a right to have their elected representatives perform their duties on behalf of the city in an efficient and orderly manner. Therefore, comments will be limited to 3 minutes each. To please wait to be recognized, come to the podium and state your name and address for the record. Direct your comments to the council as a whole and not to individual members. In order to protect the privacy rights of employees and protect members of the public from legal liability, please note that this is not the appropriate venue to make complaints or accusations about an implied or named city employee or agent. Such oral comments will not be allowed but can be submitted in writing to the city clerk. 4, please note that this is not a time to ask questions of the council, mayor, or staff, or to engage in debate. The council will quietly and respectfully listen to your concerns. And last, please respect the decorum of these proceedings, as all due respect will be afforded to you. With that, would anybody like to speak at this time on any item that is not on the agenda? Yeah, Corey?
Go ahead.
I'll get you next, Wayne.
Hello, Mayor Larson, members of the council. My name's Corey Morris, 11407 183rd Place Northeast in Redmond, Washington. I'm the regional editor of the Valley Record, and I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about the newspaper of record and legal advertisements. I'm hoping to make an appeal to you to bring your business back to us. And I want to start by just thanking the council for the years of business. We really appreciate it. Part of us is being a local business here in the Valley. We pride ourselves on that and trying to keep track of what's going on in the community and trying to be the voice of the community here. So we've been doing this since 1913, not myself, but a lot of people have been working to, float this ship. And we take a lot of pride in carrying that tradition. So that's 106 years, and I did the math. And so, we're local. Wait, for a second here. Let's get Andy Hobbs in here. Go ahead.
I'm editorial director for Sound Publishing's King County Papers. And we're just glad to be here, and really we understood that the deadline for legals was a problem, and we're willing to move our press deadline to accommodate the city of Snoqualmie's legal ads and become your official newspaper of record again.
Thank you. I think there's a lot of good reasons to make that switch again. I know that you just switched over to the Seattle Times, but I believe that we can service the Valley and the citizens of the Valley a lot better than the Seattle Times. For one, we have a little more accessibility. Our rates for subscribers is a lot less. I don't think I have to tell you that, but it's $39 for the year compared to $452.40 for the year, and I did that by doing the math, and just that's 7 days a week, including weekends and unlimited digital and all of that. And I ignored their little promo for the first 4 weeks just for transparency's sake. That's how I made those numbers. So it's $39 a year for your residents to see what you're doing, what you're planning to do, what you've done. It's right there. It's once a week. It's all in one spot once a week. They don't have to look around Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It's right there on Friday. They get their Valley Record. There it is. I think that another comment that was sort of made during the council meeting where the decision was made to switch it was that the city can advertise or post notice on the website as well. And I would like to say that that kind of infringes a little bit on accountability. So when you're publishing in a newspaper of record, it's there. Nobody can take it down except for the newspaper.
Go ahead.
Am I out of time?
Just try to wrap up, Corey.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just wrap it up very quickly. We're happy to make adjustments on our end. We'll have to change workflow, but I have discussed with Jody Warren, the city clerk. I went to her immediately to discuss sort of what the hangups were and where we were on that. So we're able to make adjustments to accommodate with her. She's going to speak with the Parks and Recs or a few other departments that need to put in legal notices. But hopefully an ordinance or a resolution comes before you to change the newspaper of record back to the Snoqualmie Valley Record. And I would ask that you approve that and come on back to us.
Corey, sorry. Okay.
Yes.
I'm going to ask you to wrap it up.
And that's it. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Corey, Andy, thanks for coming, both of you, for coming out tonight and introducing yourselves. All right, Wayne.
Wayne Russell, 8438 Meadowbrook Way Southeast. First off, I'd like to say, wow, that was pretty cool. I actually saw a vote where there were 4 nays and 2 ayes. What did I do wrong?
You're good.
You're beeping me already. You don't like me.
You haven't even started it yet. You're good.
Now I've only got 4 seconds left.
Well, you said that was pretty cool at council. We beeped those.
Yeah, I know, that's what, you want me to stop there, I can understand that. Anyhow, my concern is I with the quasi-judicial process, I'm sitting here and I started calling it the crazy judicial process because I believe it's really sad that citizens' comments really are, when we find out, like these gentlemen said, a matter of record, there's issues 9 and 10 years ago that many citizens that didn't even live here weren't aware of. And I lived here and I wasn't aware of many of them that were happening, or I would have been at more meetings. So I was glad to see a vote, and I hope that we continue to see some votes where maybe the council votes no for some stuff. You know, it usually never happens. It's always like 6-1. Today it'd only be 5-1, I guess. But anyhow, I'd really like to see where something is done, because there are many issues coming up, which includes an LOMR, which is a letter of map revision with FEMA, that supposedly takes 4 schools out of the floodway. And I'd like to know what 4 schools those are and how they're going to be out of the floodway. And I'm going to submit this to the clerk. It's a video I took in 2009 of the flood, and it's also photos of the outside of my house. And when I took the videos, if you compare the photos to the video, I'm in my driveway with hip boots on, but in the gravel part. But when you look at the high school parking garage and the elementary school, it's Lake Snoqualmie. So anyhow, my main concern is with the FEMA and the letter of map revisions, and also many of the other decisions that are going to affect how we're building within our city, because I don't believe in stopping growth, but I sure would like to see it slowed some. So I hope you all understand where I'm coming from. There's things we need, there's things we don't need, and most of us citizens over here who you people represent, and these people over here are staff that work for us, there's a big difference. You folks represent us, so really the citizens need to be heard, and I don't believe a lot of that's been happening. I met a lady at the DOT meeting from the Ridge. She's a really nice lady. The mayor talked to her for quite a while too, but she brought up the point that she talked to her neighbors before she went to the town hall and what was going on the Ridge. Nobody was interested. They were like I was 30 years ago. Soccer moms, dads, or whatever, taking care of family first. And myself right now, the way my wife's been feeling, you may not see me as much because I'm really concerned about her. As a matter of fact, she was sleeping when I left tonight. So anyhow, I'm just really concerned, and I'd really like to see you folks representing us and working with these people, but not us necessarily with their recommendations, because we do have some very good staff members, and I'm proud to know most of them as well as I am all of you. I've gotten a lot more acquainted over the last year, and I'm going to get beeped. So this is for the city clerk.
Thank you, Wayne. Good to see you.
Mayor, point of information, what committee does the LOMAR process go through?
That's the CDC.
CDC.
Yeah. All right. Anybody else like to speak? Anna?
Anna Sotelo, 7117 Almond Avenue, Southeast. I wasn't going to say anything, but I figure while they're wheeling and dealing and trying to cut a deal and sitting through the F&A meetings, and that was the problem with the Valley record, was the time, and if they're willing to do that, that's awesome. But while they're willing to wheel and deal, if I was here making this deal, I would say to them, just public on your Facebook, please note when this public notice is to go, when it went out. Because I think most people see the Valley record in Facebook, and then they get interested in a story, they click on, et cetera. So that's what I would tell them. You got a deal.
All right, thank you, Anna. Is there anybody else from the public that would like to speak at this time? William?
William Donaldson, 8203 Park Avenue Southeast. Happy Earth Day. This may well be my favorite holiday, for it's at least one day out of the year when humanity shows some semblance of gratitude to the world which has borne us all. It's not Earth Day which brings me before you, but it seems fitting that such a celebration befalls what I believe to be a conversation long overdue. Snoqualmie is beautiful. Perhaps there are those of us who grow tired of hearing those words, but I'm thankful to not be among them. Snoqualmie is also a very windy city, as we and our neighbors throughout this valley well know. For we are often reminded of that wind in a disturbing way, and the reminder comes in the form of a visual recognition, unwelcomed and too often ignored. We are inundated with plastic. I know it, and I'm not the only one. I'm also not the only one living in this city that has sacrificed my time to clean up this disturbing mess. It is a great threat because, unlike paper and other materials which have an organic nature, petroleum-based plastics do not. In fact, it's well known that oil-based plastics require centuries before they even begin to decompose. I'm sure, being the leaders that you are, that you're aware of an immense hoard of plastic currently navigating the open seas of this world. An estimated 150 million metric tons of it, and 8 million more each year. Plastic, which fills the bellies of wildlife whose ancestors have long inhabited this planet. How much of this waste does Snoqualmie contribute? We live right next to a major river, which is draining directly to the Pacific year-round. Plastic waste is an environmental catastrophe. I was disappointed after I attended the city's first official town hall to find my posted question ignored. So I'll ask it here today, rhetorically, of course. What is the city of Snoqualmie doing to make this a greener, more environmentally friendly community? Our neighbors to the east and our neighbors to the west have already banned single-use plastic bags, straws, food containers, and various other often used plastic products which are well known to contaminate the earth. Our state is currently pursuing such legislative solutions. And yet, living in the 21st century as we do, there are biodegradable plastics and papers made from plants which largely eliminate this unsustainable means of consumption. There already exists functioning, tried, tested, and well-written municipal legislation which, in the case of Seattle, has been in effect for over 10 years. I would be happy to direct your eyes to said ordinances at your convenience. Please let us move forward with environmental protection laws and lead this valley in new ways to protect the earth for our children's sake. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, William. And you're welcome to submit your written comments if you'd like for the record. All right. Anybody else like to speak at this time? All right, seeing no one else move forward, we will move on to the consent agenda. All items listed below will be enacted by one motion. Action items include minutes for the April 8, 2019 regular city council meeting. And that's pretty much it. So, we have a motion to approve the minutes,
I
council?
move.
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes for April 8, 2019 council meeting. Is there any member of the public that would like to comment as part of action? All right, with that, Councilmember Mayhew.
Lost him. I'll find him.
Filibustering?
Yeah. Here we go. A couple requested changes. First page, discussion about excusing Councilmember Mayhew, who arrived 2 minutes later. Perhaps that should be noted there, or I'd requested it be noted there.
Okay.
On the second page, there's a missing word. It says Councilmember Shepherd, that the warrants be removed. Move
Requested.
that we insert the word requested. On the third page, citizen comments, Fuzzy Fletcher says working with him to resolving accommodations. I think that word should be resolve. And then he says Fuzzy announced that he will be filing candidacy. My recollection, he announced that he will be running for position 4, not 5. Anyway, so I believe that should be changed. And on the last page, Councilmember Mayhew requested that the city explore alternative funding. I believe the sentence should end there. I didn't mention such as GoFundMe. So I believe it should just end at the end of the word funding.
All right. Can you make a motion to that effect?
I move that we adopt the minutes with those changes.
Second.
All right, motion and a second to change the minutes as noted by Councilmember Mayhew. Any discussion, council? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. And Tia did capture all those notes as you were speaking, so. All right, with that, we will move on to ordinances. Community Development Committee, Agenda Bill 19035, ordinance adopting plat procedures code amendment. This is only for introduction tonight because I was like, I just asked that you read the summary statement.
Review procedures for subdivisions are mainly unchanged since 1991. Short plats are decided by the Community Development Director, while long plats are decided by the City Council after a public hearing and recommendation by the hearing examiner. Final plats are decided by the City Council. State law provides for additional flexibility in approval procedures. The proposed amendments would change the decision maker for preliminary plats to the hearing examiner, change the decision maker for final plats to the Community Development Director, change the number of lots for a short plat from 4 to 9, streamline some process requirements, and implement general cleanup.
All right, as was noted, this is only for introduction tonight, so or if there's any questions or comments. I'll throw it out to the public first. Is there any questions or comments from the public? Or I shouldn't say questions. Is there comments from the public prior to the council deliberations on this item? I see no one. Wayne, go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing I'm going to really say is I'm hoping this gets voted down because I really don't believe that one person should make the determination and take it away from our city council, as several of the items, as I went through it line by line, seem to insinuate. So anyhow, this is one of the situations where I'm hoping that maybe we are heard. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else? All right, with that, I'll ask the chair of the committee to introduce this item. Go ahead, Councilor Mayhew.
So, fellow council members, this matter consists of 6 changes proposed by the administration to Snoqualmie's plat procedures. These changes arise following the state's revision of state law that now permits the changes that are being proposed. The Planning Commission held 5 meetings during which they considered these proposed changes, and they held a public hearing to collect input from residents and others. All of the public input is in the materials provided in advance of this meeting. The Planning Commission recommended adoption of Amendments 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6, and did not recommend adoption of Amendment 3. The Community Development Council Committee had 2 meetings during which these proposed changes were considered and reviewed the Planning Commission recommendations and basis, along with the public comments they obtained and the comments provided by members of the public at committee meetings. The Community Development Committee unanimously recommends, following the Planning Commission recommendation of adopting Amendments 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6, and not adopting Amendment 3 for the reasons stated in their recommendation. City Planner Rogers is here to provide a more in-depth presentation on the proposed changes and to answer questions.
Thank you, Councilor Mayhew. Jason, go ahead.
All right. Thank you. Jason Rogers, Senior Planner with the Community Development Department. So talk about plat procedures tonight. So here's a quick overview of what I'll go through. I'll start by giving you an overview of the permit process and the different categories of permits, followed by the different types of plats, the short plat lot threshold, general cleanup, and then a short summary at the end. So this is an important place to start. This is the 4 categories of permits the city in general has. There's some that break out of this, but when we're talking about plats, everything's going to fit in this. So category 1, so I'll walk through these so you get an overview. This is admittedly kind of dense. Category 1 permits do not have a notice of application, which means we don't publish it in the paper, we don't mail it to anybody within a certain radius. There's no public hearing for these. The decision is made by staff. Generally, this is going to be the Community Development Director. We don't send notice to anybody of what the decision is. There is what's called an administrative appeal, and by administrative, we're talking about an appeal to a different deciding body at the city. So this would not be an appeal to the courts. And some examples I included there, sign permits are an example, lot line adjustments, clear and grade permits would also be an example. The next one down, category 2, differs because for this one, we send notice to people. So this is, we publish it in the paper, we send it to everybody within 500 feet of the site. Usually gets posted at the post office here at City Hall, a couple other places. Again, there's an appeal to the hearing examiner that's provided, and we would send a notice of decision to anybody who sends us a comment. The main example of this is a short plat, a subdivision of land into 4 or fewer new lots. Category 3 permits are next up. Again, we send the notice of application to people within a certain distance. There is a public hearing, so this is where it starts to change. There's a public hearing in front of either the Planning Commission or the hearing examiner, depending on what kind of permit it is. The decision on this is made by the City Council, so what you'll see is that the hearing examiner or this Planning Commission will make a recommendation to the council on what they recommend. The council has the final say. We send the notice of decision. Because the City Council makes the decision, there is no possible appeal within the city because the council is the city's highest decision maker for permits. So any appeal of such a decision needs to be to the courts. Examples that we have today would be preliminary plats, master plans, and rezones. Finally, we have category 4 permits. Again, notice of application and comment period. Again, we have a public hearing in front of the hearing examiner or the or the planning commission. In this case, the decision is then made by whoever held the public hearing, whether it's the hearing examiner or the planning commission. Because this is not the highest decision maker, there is an appeal available to the city council. Examples of this are variances and conditional use permits. So some recent examples the council has seen is early in 2018, the council heard an appeal of a conditional use permit. That was a closed record appeal, meaning you could not take new factual information, but you could consider the information you had in front of you to render a decision on that appeal. That conditional use permit was originally decided by the hearing examiner. And then for a Category 3 permit, one that the council decides from the beginning, the Salish Master Plan you saw late last year was Category 3. The Planning Commission held the public hearing, made a recommendation to this council. The council then had to consider it as a closed record quasi-judicial action from which there was no appeal to anybody else at the city. It was appealed, it had to go to the courts. So with that overview in place, the process for a short plat, so this is a subdivision of one piece of property into 4 or fewer, is a Category 2 permit. That means we send a notice of application out, we get public comments, they can be verbal, they can be written, email us, whatever works for people. There is no public hearing. The community development director makes the decision on these, and then there is an appeal available to the hearing examiner. No changes are proposed to the short plat process because the short plat process is pretty well specified by state law. So there's not a lot of room to make changes to the process itself. For preliminary plats, so this is any other any subdivision of land into 5 or more lots under the city's current code. So whether it's 5, whether it's 500, you're still going to see this. There's still a notice of application, still get the public comments. A slight difference here is that people, when we send the notice of application, people can then send us comments right then, or they can come to the public hearing and make comments at the public hearing, either in writing or verbally to the hearing examiner. As I mentioned, there's a public hearing for these. The hearing examiner makes a recommendation to the city council, and then city council will have to decide it. There is no administrative appeal, as I mentioned before. The proposed change from the ordinance you see in front of you would change preliminary plats to a Category 4. So all the changes are in italics up there. So instead of, I'll go back, instead of Category 3, now you're looking at Category 4. Everything up through the public hearing is still the same. It's still heard by the hearing examiner. In this case, the change would make the preliminary plat decision, or it would place the preliminary plat decision in the hearing examiner's hands. That then provides for an administrative appeal to the city council if someone were to disagree with the hearing examiner's decision. Final plats, so in the process you have what's called a preliminary plat, which is when somebody comes and they want to make a 20-lot subdivision. They go through the review, are the lots the right size? Do they have too many lots? Are they providing enough landscaping? Do they have the roads and the utilities? Between the preliminary plat and final plats are a hybrid process. They follow elements of Category 1 and elements of Category 3. So there's no notice of application. We don't tell anybody. Strictly speaking, public comments are accepted. With no notice, we typically wouldn't get any comments because nobody knows to comment. For final plat, comments typically aren't very useful because, as I said, this is a yes or no decision. There's no discretion here. It's not an opportunity to argue the plat should or should not have been approved whenever it was originally approved. You can't go back and change that. There's no public hearing, but it is a city council decision. So what the council would see is a staff report and a recommendation from the community development director and the administration. And then the council decides it. There's no administrative appeal, which isn't maybe that big a deal because it's a yes or no question, but that is there. The proposal in the ordinance would change this to a Category 1 approval. So you'd still have no notice of application. We'd still get public comments if somebody knew. There's no public hearing. In this case, the community development director would make the final decision on the final plat to answer the yes or no question. Technically, this provides for an administrative appeal to the hearing examiner should somebody disagree and say, no, they really didn't build that sidewalk that they were supposed to build, as an example. Usually we would catch that and say, no, you need to build that sidewalk. Mr. Mayor.
I'm sorry, Councilor Holdaway.
So help me with maybe my public education coming through. Comments on final plat would be inapt. What does that mean?
I was trying to find other potential terms would be not useful, as an example. Inapt in this case is saying they're not particularly helpful in most cases because it's if, for example, you're deciding for a final plat, you're going through the list of conditions of approval for a preliminary plat, say, did they do that, yes or no? Did they do this, yes or no? And so general members of the public typically aren't terribly aware of all the conditions of approval or oftentimes we'll see arguments saying, why are you, well, you get one of two choice things. Either, wait, didn't this get approved years ago? What's taking so long? Or, no, don't do this, even though the decision was made 3 years prior.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you.
Yep. So again, back to the table so you can see what I'm talking about here. What we would do is we would take preliminary plats here from category 3 and move them to category 4. Short plats would stay where they are. And final plats, which you don't even see on here because they split 1 and 3, would end up here as an example of a category 1. So the proposal is to use the existing permit structure the city already has and just assign preliminary and final plats to different categories. Okay, the short plat lot threshold. Right now, state law provides that by default, short plats are for the subdivision of one lot into 4 or fewer. There is an option to change that to up to 9 lots. So some pros to this, you get a shorter and more efficient process for some projects, those projects that are subdividing between 5 and 9 lots. The process then becomes much less expensive for those projects because partly because this city has a policy of full cost recovery for permits like this, which is to say we bill our consultants' time, city staff will bill their time to the applicant. Adding a hearing examiner and council review process adds time and complexity to that. So it's less expensive for the affected projects. Another pro is you still have an appeal provided via the city hearing examiner. The con, of course, is that there's a public hearing only if the project gets appealed. Otherwise, there is no public hearing. And another con, and the Planning Commission spoke to this in their recommendation quite extensively, is that this change would probably have very limited applicability. There's been one project in the last 10 or 15 years which would have been affected by this change. We're in place today. That was a binding site plan done for the King and Silver project, the townhomes that were demolished last year. That was a 5-lot binding site plan. The council had to approve it. They did so in 2016, I believe. If this change were here, that would have been administrative. Now going forward, I'm sorry.
Ross?
Is there a minimum size lot then you're going to divide into 4 lots?
It would be based on the zoning code. So whatever the zoning code, for example, would say you can have 4 lots per acre, which gives you approximately a 10,000 square foot lot. None of that's proposed to change at all. So whatever the underlying density is still the density today, tomorrow, and not affected by this at all. This is just a change to the procedure a permit would follow.
Councilmember Mayhew.
So just to be clear, this particular proposed change from 4 lots to 9 lots, this is the Amendment 3, which the Planning Commission recommended against. Is that correct?
Correct.
Councilman Lasay.
And the Community Development Committee also recommended against.
Yes. I did do a quick analysis to say which cities are doing which. I will point out there's not a particular pattern to this. So cities with the 4-lot threshold is Issaquah, Carnation, Duval, and of course Snoqualmie. 9-lot threshold is all the ones you see listed up there. Again, there's not a real pattern here. I would say, Issaquah, for example, updated its subdivision code about 6 or 7 years ago and did not make the change. Other cities have updated their subdivision code in a similar timeframe and did make the change. So it's entirely a local option. Another amendment proposed in here relates to variances. So right now, the city has effectively 3 different variance processes. One is related to short plat applications, and for these, the hearing examiner decides them. For variances related to preliminary plats, full subdivisions, the council decides them. And then for quote-unquote general variances, the hearing examiner decides them. So the proposal is to make all variances hearing examiner decisions, but I will point out this goes hand in hand with the preliminary plat decision maker. If the council retains the decision-making authority for a preliminary plat, it would make sense that the council should also continue deciding those variances rather than have a split with the hearing examiner doing one thing and the council doing a different but related thing. Some process streamlining and general cleanup items are the last two. So the process streamlining is just to pull some of the process requirements that we have in our code together. So, for example, the subdivision code specifies a 300-foot mailing radius for when we mail that notice of application. The practice is to use 500 feet. It says 500 feet elsewhere in the code, and so we would just change the subdivision code to say 500 feet. Another one is to lengthen the public comment period from 15 to 21 days. 21 days is more common anyway. And then we would also change the timing of when the city has to send out that notice of application. Currently, city staff has 20 days between when we say this application is complete to when it has to be published. We would speed that up to 14 days. So what that effectively does is we get the notice out sooner and the public has longer to comment. So we're taking, you can see there's a 6-day change. We're just shifting that from city staff time to public time. And then the general cleanup is just some things that have built up over the years. For example, a 2012 state law change makes preliminary plats valid for 5 years instead of 3. Change an outdated reference from tape recorded to audio recording. I don't think we tape anything. This is all electronic recording. Sensitive areas would change to critical areas. That's in response to a city code change in 2016. And then there's an exemption for subdivisions of very large lots that we would remove. Not that it's maybe particularly, it has particular applicability here, but we want to make sure that any subdivisions are going through the city's process and not sidestepping the process simply because they happen to be very, very large. So there's the summary up there of all the different items. I'm certainly happy to take questions.
Councilmember James.
Jason, help me understand this, that you're going to change it from 300 feet to 500 feet, that is giving notices, and that says a radius of 500. So if there's a little lot, a notice to 500 feet is going to get a lot of houses. But if you have a huge lot, maybe 500 feet doesn't even go to the lot line. So what is that?
We measure the radius, in this case 500 feet, from the boundaries of the lot in question. So if somebody has a very, very large lot, we draw 500 from the edge of that lot.
It's more of an offset from the perimeter, not a radius.
Good.
In fact, that's what happened in that notification of the hotel error, is that
We did it from the
Ben used a radius off of our system versus the King County one that does an offset of the lot. Yeah.
Good.
Maybe offset would be better.
Yeah, we may want to
Yeah.
change the wordage to be clear on that.
Property line offsets or something, 500 feet, to be clear about that. Councilman Lasay.
When you're ready.
Yep.
I want to go back to variances, if you can go back to that page. You said something different than you didn't bring up at least maybe my memory is not what it used to be, but you didn't bring up the conversation about your recommendation just now of if council is the decision maker, council should be the hearing, and if the hearing examiner is decision maker, the hearing examiner should be the appeal. Explain that a little bit more. I'm a little confused why you would have the same ruling body ruling on an appeal.
So under the code today, so the way the code is written today, if somebody applies for variance along with the preliminary plat, both of those are decided by the city council. So they'll follow the same process of, they apply for it, the hearing examiner will hold a public hearing on them and make a recommendation to the council on both the plat and the variance, then the city council has the final decision. The proposed change in the ordinance would make all variances decided by the hearing examiner. However, my point just now, I recall that I made it at the committee, but it may have gotten a little
asleep.
Yeah, but the point I was making is that it makes sense to keep the decision maker for a variance related to a preliminary plat the same. So right now, it does, even though it creates a little bit of confusion as to who decides a variance, it makes sense that there's a provision in state law that allows what's called consolidation of all related permits at the highest decision maker. So if you had, for example, a combined clear and grade permit, preliminary plat, and variance that you're applying for, we would just take all those things and stick them and have the city council decide them all. Even though, strictly speaking, the clear and grade permit could be decided by staff, the preliminary plat by council, and if you ignored that provision that's in the code today, you could, the hearing examiner could decide it. And the provisions there so that you have a more efficient process. You're not having these different approvals at different levels, but it's at the applicant's option. They can say, no, I want the separate approvals.
I'm still not following. Let me ask it a little bit differently then. Bullet point number 2, under the variances related to plat applications.
Yes.
You note that city council decision for variances related to preliminary plat as a category 3.
Yes.
However, we're proposing that we change preliminary plats from category 3 to category 4. So city council doesn't make a decision on preliminary plats under this ordinance, it would, or this, I guess it's an ordinance.
Yeah.
Those would be now with the hearing examiner.
Correct.
And council would be the appeal.
Correct.
So how, I'm not following you then on this, where it says city council, it's why you would keep one thing different when everything's moving to category 4, which would align with the plat applications in there. I mean, I guess maybe I'm not answering the question the right way, but I'm confused myself. So I don't follow how a category 3 is applicable anymore because we're proposing that it's changed to a category 4.
If you don't do this change, what you would end up with is the tricky situation where the hearing examiner would be the decision-making body for a preliminary plat, but the code would specify that a variance related to a preliminary plat is decided by the city council. That's why this change is recommended.
Then I don't understand why you said something differently about keeping something. I'm kind of lost. Maybe I'll let others ask questions and maybe I'll understand.
Councilmember Shepherd.
So I have some concerns about changing to a hearing examiner. And I was trying to find any cases where a hearing examiner disagreed with what the staff had recommended, and I couldn't find a single case where the decision came down that it disagreed with staff. So I feel like a hearing examiner may be like a rubber stamp for what staff is recommending. But I have seen cases where there's an appeal to what the hearing examiner's decision has been made to the appellate court, and the hearing examiner's decision was overruled by the appellate court. So I don't think that it's black and white. I think that there's lots of shades of gray when it comes to these decisions. I was looking at, there's some general rule of law as far as deference. Generally, when a hearing examiner comes, they're, I guess, taught in law school that they should basically defer to whoever they consider to be the expert in the room. And that would be our community development director, I'm assuming. So I feel like it just kind of reinforces the idea that a hearing examiner would probably not come to any different conclusion than whatever the staff had recommended. And I was looking at some of the communities in Seattle that are pushing back on development, and they're struggling with some of these same questions that I'm sharing with you right now as far as hearing examiner decisions and how they come about, whether something should be, for instance, you can, I guess, appeal when somebody does environmental impact study, and whether there is reason to do an environmental impact study. It turns out that often the reason that they decide that it doesn't require an environmental impact study is because they don't look at it in the context of the neighborhood that it's impacting. It actually is looked at in the context of the entire city. And this is talking about Seattle. There's about 30 neighborhoods that are really pushing back on some of these development regulations. But for their local community, it's a severe impact, however, for their community. But in the context of the entire city of Seattle, it's not. So I'm a little concerned about, some of this is getting down to, we want to separate what our elected officials is doing as far as quasi-judicial versus legislative. And I think that our city is not really in a position to be breaking away from, making the decisions with council, because we haven't really done the hard work of going through our other regulations that would be legislative, and, as far as how these decisions would be made prior to coming to, say, the community development director. For instance, when we had the annexation question come to us, I think we could have quickly, just not dealt with that issue if we had set something in place that said, if it doesn't meet these particular standards, it shouldn't even be going through our process. But we didn't have that. So I think, if anything, if we are really seriously wanting to go back to, what is our comprehensive plan process, and get that, really put together properly, then we could possibly consider going to a hearing examiner. But right now, I don't think that we've really done the hard work to go through our comprehensive plan process.
Councilmember Mayhew.
I have two questions. One is just, do plat procedures or variances involve environmental impact studies?
Potentially they could. There are no changes proposed to the city's SEPA procedures, which are largely dictated by state law. Certainly I could describe them, although I'm not sure it's entirely relevant.
Yeah. That's what I was trying to understand, how relevant that was, EIS to it, but it could be relevant, you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, so short plats, to speak directly to the proposal, so short plats are exempt from SEPA review. Subdivisions are not. There's not a blanket exemption, and so generally we would do a SEPA environmental review of a subdivision proposal, of preliminary plat. Sometimes preliminary, based on the analysis of the environmental checklist and, other supporting documents, it may be necessary to do an environmental impact statement. But that's a determination that is specifically granted by state law to the SEPA responsible official, meaning, in this city's case, the community development director. There's certainly appeal procedures for SEPA determinations as well. I will say most of them end up with what's called a determination of non-significance, meaning they won't have a significant unavoidable environmental impact. Some of them have what's called a mitigated determination of non-significance, where if you add certain mitigations, that would reduce any potential impacts below a level of significance. And then some, of course, get an EIS. So there's no way to say ahead of time what any particular project would or wouldn't come out with, because they're all project specific.
All right. So I just want to confirm with you an understanding that I came to have during the committee meetings. It's my understanding that all of these plat procedures that we're talking about tonight are quasi-judicial.
Yes.
So, meaning, we can't legislate. We can't impose rules. All we can do is look at the existing code that applies to to what's being requested and simply apply that code. That's all that's happening either in the preliminary plat or in the final plat, right?
Correct.
We're just applying code. It's just a question of, so there's a concern that I've heard from some people that something that the council could do as an elected body, which usually implies to me some legislative thing, some imposition of requirements or rules or something that we would like to have, we can require in a situation. And it's my understanding in these plat procedures that would not be the case. We would have to simply apply the municipal code as it was written on at the time they applied, or whatever the trigger point is, and that's all we can do. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, and then the second thing related to that decision moving away from elected representatives. So it's really just a question of who's going to apply the law. And if they're doing it well, whoever they are, they're all going to come up with the same answer, right?
In theory, yes.
In theory. We have an appeal process to make sure that that doesn't get fouled up, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, in fact, in what's being proposed, am I correct that in all cases, the city council will still be an appeal body in the path?
I don't believe in every case. If I go back here, for example, final plats, which are currently decided by the city council, would shift to a category 1, a staff decision in this case, and the appeal of a category 1 permit is to the hearing examiner. So that is one place where the council would no longer be an appeal body, or rather be involved in the decision at all.
And that would be for what kind of a thing?
For final plats.
Oh, for final plat, which is all we're doing at a final plat is deciding, did you in fact build the street that you were required to build in the preliminary plat? Did you do what the preliminary plat required you to do?
Correct.
It's just a yes, either you did it or you didn't do it.
Right.
Okay.
Councilmember Shepherd.
So I recused myself from the affordable housing decision because I had attended the hearing examiner appeal for that decision. And as an example, real-world example of what kind of things you can be deciding on, is not a black and white, is they were trying to decide how many spaces each residential unit should be required to have for parking for affordable housing. And so they had 2 traffic engineers there representing 2 different organizations. And then they had Leslie Shepard, who was somebody who has worked in the industry of affordable housing. The traffic engineers said that they don't know how many spaces would be required in that location because it wasn't near, it wasn't a transit hub. So their experience had been with Federal Way, which was very close to a lot of transportation. However, Leslie Shepard had worked with affordable housing for years, and she knew that there would be a number of cars for each residential unit because her experience said that she knew that often people would have friends and others living with them, and they may have some vehicles that aren't parking in the parking lot. So she knew. However, the hearing examiner took the traffic engineers who openly said they don't know, but they would guess that there would be just 1 car per unit. And that was significant as far as how they decided whether to add another level to the units. So I can see where that could be very much a shade of gray. So I don't think that when it comes to a hearing examiner, everything is just black and white. And I think that, as far as experience, there's experience when it comes to law and having to do with land and having to do with architecture. And then there's experience with having lived in this area for 30 years and knowing all the pre-existing agreements that have been in place. So I think that it's not as simple and black and white as you might think.
I wouldn't say that a preliminary plat approval is a black and white approval because you are applying the law, so to speak. Well, not so to speak. You are applying the law, the city's law, to a specific proposal, and certain parts of the city's law does have some room for, I wouldn't call interpretation, but there is some flexibility in certain portions. Parking is one example. Landscaping would be another. What the hearing examiner relies on in a public hearing is the applicant will have their experts, whether it's a traffic engineer, a landscape architect, whoever it is on whatever issue, and they're going to make a specific argument in favor of the project. The public hearing provides an opportunity for other interested parties, whether they're opponents or just were curious, to come up and make a comment and even to provide their own testimony. It's then incumbent on the hearing examiner in this specific case to weigh that information, decide. It's partly determining credibility. It's partly, determining, what information are they actually providing me that I can base a decision on. And so if they have an engineer who signs and stamps something to say, I'm putting my professional license on the line to say what I'm saying in this letter, that tends to carry a lot of weight. They're an expert, as you pointed out earlier, and we tend to rely on experts. You do get into situations where you have, if you will, dueling experts, where you have an expert on one side saying one thing, an expert on the other side saying a different thing, and it's the hearing examiner's job to weigh that. If the council's involved in a quasi-judicial permit, it then becomes the council's job to weigh that. And certainly there's reasonable room for disagreement there. What the reason cities and counties tend to use hearing examiners is because, as you stated, Councilmember Shepherd, they are trained in the law. It's not necessarily something that they're kind of told in law school, oh, you defer. It's actually a legal principle well established through case law that there is deference to local government decisions. So that's, and the hearing examiners know that. They understand the case law that surrounds land use decisions. That's why we hire them, because they tend to help us avoid procedural pitfalls that could put a decision into question. They help use their expertise as generally a land use attorney to weigh the information they're getting in the public hearing and that the staff's presenting to them to say, is this more credible? Is that more credible? Does this matter less or more? And I recall the hearing examiners are fond of saying things along the lines of, these public hearings, these quasi-judicial permit applications are not beauty contests. It's not a popularity contest. You can have 500 people saying one thing on one side, but if the information says something else, they have to go with the information. And it is very difficult to do that. And so one of the main reasons why we would propose using a hearing examiner is that the hearing examiner is not a political animal. They're there to implement what the code says in their best judgment. The council is generally a political body. You generally legislate, and so the council is subject to all those political pressures. It's difficult. I'm not saying it's impossible, because certainly this council has acted responsibly and arguably correctly on permit decisions before, and likely would again, and many other city councils in the region do the same thing all the time. So it's not that you can't or are incapable, but taking the council out of a lot of land use is just makes it generally easier for the council to operate and allows the council to focus on the legislative and policy items that are more within your wheelhouse, for lack of a better term.
I was going to ask the city attorney to comment, and I'll come back to the councilman.
Just a couple of comments. The affordable housing project was not a plat. It was not a subdivision. It wasn't a short plat. It was a conditional use permit. The criteria for those are considerably broader than the plat regulations. And the plat regulations are the specific standards that Council Mayhew was inquiring about. They are, what are the road standards? What are the utility standards? What's the plat layout standards? Those are all specified there, and it's the decision maker's job to apply those to the proposal. There's much less discretion in those standards than in a conditional use permit like was being decided for the affordable housing project. And what Jason was just describing in terms of the political pressure aspect is the reason that WCIA, the Washington Cities Insurance Authority, recommends that cities use hearing examiners or independent decision makers as much as possible. Because, as you've heard in some of the comments here, when residents come to the council, they expect the council to listen to their concerns. If they say, I don't think this plat is consistent with the feel of historic Snoqualmie, or I don't like it, they expect you to listen to their concerns because you're their elected official, but you're sitting in a role where you don't have that ability or the ability that you have in a legislative matter to take that into account. And that creates that tension, and it has resulted in some bad decisions and liability for other cities, some substantial liability in some cases in the order of tens of millions of dollars. And that's what leads WCIA to make that that recommendation. So that's what Mr. Rogers is talking about here. Last but not least, going through the comprehensive plan is not something that either the council or the hearing examiner does as part of a decision-making. You don't need to go back through your comprehensive plan process. What's being applied are the regulations that are in Title 16 right now in the comprehensive plan. Those were, I think, first adopted comprehensively in 1991, and they've been amended a couple times since then.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Yes, I just want to double back because I feel I was misquoted, and I just want to get clear on this. I believe that I only used the term black and white when I was referring to the final plat procedures that you had brought to our attention as being Category 1. I was trying to understand why it might be appropriate for the city council not to be involved in a final plat decision. And so what I was trying to get clear on is that a final plat, and please, if it's gray, please tell me right now, but it's my understanding the final plat really is black and white. There's something that was laid out on the preliminary plat, and they did it or they didn't do it. You don't get to add anything new, you don't get to change anything, you just get to, did they do it or didn't they do it? And that's why I thought, now if that's really not the nature, then tell me it's gray.
No, your recollection is correct. Final plats would be black and white. Yes or no questions.
All right, so the reason I was asking is because it's my understanding is the only thing that doesn't have the city council, in these procedures, in these plat procedures that we're discussing tonight, under the proposal, the only thing that wouldn't go as an appeal to city council would be something to do with final plats.
Correct.
Anything to do with preliminary plats, which is where those requirements get laid out, well, it's where the code gets applied to say what has to happen. As the city attorney was just describing, you're applying that section of the code. That's the preliminary plat. Those can all be appealed to the city council under the proposal. It's the final plat, which is just that basically black and white, did they do it or not, that would not go back to the city council.
Correct.
Thank you.
Councilmember Ross.
So do you have this form with what you're recommending or the draft?
I do not.
You don't?
I can certainly make it if it's helpful.
Because otherwise we need to go back and kind of, draw our own lines and figure
Yeah.
out where it's supposed to be going. So that would be helpful. I have a question on the final plat. On this document where you have it laid out, it shows what all the different changes are. Is it A1,
Yeah.
A2?
Yes.
And so B, the final plat procedure, so it says that the decision, change the decision to make community development director would sign off on that, correct?
Correct.
And then it talks about the mayor, so the mayor has the final signature on it?
Yes, state law requires the mayor's signature on plat documents. So from a technical perspective, what the council does when they do preliminary plats is they authorize the mayor to sign it. What we would do is we would switch it around to have the community development director make that determination and then say, here, Mr. Mayor, this meets all the requirements, please sign it. Now, the mayor can do whatever review he decides he wants to do or not wants to do. It's up to the mayor, but I understand it's a fine point of law specifically.
Okay.
But-
And does he sign off on everything else as well? All the preliminary and like the final? Just that?
I don't believe the mayor's signature is required on a preliminary plat because the preliminary plats are not recorded documents.
Okay, because it goes up to the final?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Holloway, and then Councilmember Shepherd.
No,
Councilmember Shepherd.
Okay, so going back to final plats and that there's never anything that it could deviate or change between the preliminary plat agreement of what's supposed to happen and whether or not that's happened. RCW that I have found says that sometimes there are exceptions to that basic law, that sometimes things can be changed and that depending on what is needed for the community as far as health and safety, it could actually change between the preliminary plat and the final plat.
there could be some minor changes. For example, they could delete a lot, but the city's code and state law is also very clear that you can't change the proposal such that it is so dissimilar from the original proposal that it's not the same proposal. Hypothetically, if someone were to come with a final plat that added a lot, that would not fly. Because the answer is the final plat, in conformance with the preliminary plat? The answer is no. Somehow you went from 20 to 21 lots. That wasn't analyzed. All the information wasn't based on it. Was on 21. It was based on 20. So
Right, there's a process for alteration or vacation of plats, and the one circumstance that I'm aware of here during the Ridge development where there was a proposal to change essentially the configuration of some of the open space tracks, the applicant went back through and did an alteration and then resubmitted the plat, so.
practically speaking, what you often see is if, applicants and the city do their best during the preliminary plat review phase to end up with a plat design that is going to work. However, when an applicant goes out to actually try to build something, sometimes it doesn't work. As an example, in Issaquah, there was a large subdivision proposed at the top of their Talus urban village up above, kind of pretty far up a hillside. It got approved. The preliminary plat rather was approved by his hearing examiner. The applicant went out to start building it, which is they started moving dirt around and trying to install utilities, and a giant landslide started happening. So that's an extreme example, but sometimes the realities on the ground don't match what you think they are on the paper. There is a process for addressing those through the civil review process, and all the changes get documented. If you start running into very substantial changes, then you're going back to the beginning and starting again, because what you're changing is suddenly bearing no resemblance to what got approved. So, moving a road a little bit, that's probably okay. Moving a road from here 500 feet over here isn't going to fly.
All right. Councilman Rousset?
I just want to clarify that the conversation did clear up in my head what the decision, the modifications and variances were. Now I understand it because by moving to everything to category 4, it all aligns, and that's now I get it.
Okay.
So.
Councilor Holloway, is your hand up?
No. Go ahead.
Councilor May?
Yeah, I just have a question. Number of parking spaces. Is that, that's part of a preliminary plat? So if the code requires parking spaces, that would be part of the preliminary plat approval process?
Yes, the code requires two parking stalls for every single-family home as an example, and so one of the considerations is, do you have enough parking? And usually for single-family homes, I would say that's going to be in the garage or in the driveway, but it's absolutely considered.
All right, so that would be considered in the preliminary plat, which is appealable to the city council under this proposal.
Correct.
At final plat, can that number change, the number of parking spaces from the preliminary plat?
Where you might find some slight variation is, as I was describing earlier, when you get out to actually physically build something on the ground, maybe the road shifts a little bit. And so what you end up with is that the precise number of, usually it's street parking spots, might change a little bit. Maybe you thought you were going to get 30 street spots, and just due to the way things got configured, you end up with 28. That can happen. Usually that's not a problem. There are situations where that could absolutely be a problem, where you're talking about a very parking constrained subdivision where suddenly I guess to be clear, I can think of situations where that is an issue. I can think of many situations where that is not an issue. And so that, whether it is or is not an issue, is generally something that's going to be addressed in the preliminary plat decision. So if you have a subdivision where it's very tight, the hearing examiner or the city council might say, okay, we need to make sure that this amount of parking stays, period, no deviations. Whereas in a situation where you have a lot of parking, way over what the code requires, you might say, it doesn't matter if we lose a few spots here and there. So it's handled, I would say, whether that, parking spots is losing or gaining a few parking spots is a big deal, is largely going to be handled through the preliminary plat review. And by the time you get to final plat, you understand losing 2 spots is not a problem, or whoa, you lost 2 spots. Try it, you got to fix that.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, so let's say that the code would come up with an answer that you need 30 spots.
Right.
And if that's what the code requires, and let's just say they propose 35 or, but the code requires 30. And that's what gets approved, or maybe more than 30 gets approved in the preliminary plat. If they come ultimately in with 29, would final plat potentially say that's okay?
If the minimum requirement is 30, say they're building 15 homes, they need to have 30 parking spaces. That's what the code says. And unless the parking requirement was specifically adjusted at the preliminary plat approval through a condition of approval or some other guarantee, then you need to have 30 spaces. Because otherwise you're below the minimum and you are not meeting code.
Right, and so you would not expect a final plat approval in that situation to occur? You'd expect that
Right.
would not be approved?
Correct.
Thanks.
Councilmember Shepherd.
So as far as selecting a hearing examiner, that's done by the mayor and I guess approved by council. So we really have just a couple of people that are really at the core of making all the decisions having to do with all the development for the city of Snoqualmie. I have some concerns about that just based on historically how development has evolved. We've had development projects that started out as a smaller number, and then before it's built, they've managed to shoehorn more units into the same space. And I'm really concerned about the direction of how this is going.
Point of information, is the council member suggesting a change in how we select hearing examiner?
That would be one of my, recommendations.
Okay.
So anyway, I just wanted to be sure to put that on record that we really have everything looped around 2 primary individuals, 1 staff member and the mayor, as far as making decisions about development. Once you get to a point where a decision has been initially made, based on the rules of law, if they want to appeal, it's an uphill battle trying to undo a decision. So I would rather have the council have a shot at making the original decision rather than being the body that gets to consider an appeal.
Councilmember Mayhew and Councilmember Lissay made this point for me at the Community Development Committee meeting, the last one, but the council could potentially view the hearing examiner as a tool, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, but the hearing examiner is a tool is a tool to implement the policy and law as established by the council. So the same way that when the council delegates certain decision-making authority to the staff, it's the same thing, that you're using staff as a tool to implement what the council has decided. So if I would say if the concern is that development projects are moving through the processing and getting approved, the development projects are following the law as laid out in the city code as established by the council. And so if there's a desire to not have that done, the council has many options to address that by changing the city's code.
Councilman Mayhew.
Yeah, I was just going to say, that struck me as a key point during the committee meeting, which is what I tried to bring up earlier. This whole thing, plating procedures, is quasi-judicial. If we want to change something as the council, at the time of plating is not the time. We need to do that before someone comes to us with a plat proposal, right?
That's where you're appropriately legislating and being responsive to
Well, that's
citizen concerns.
And that's when we can legislate.
Yeah, about the values of the community.
Right, we're not stuck with applying some set of rules.
Yeah.
We can actually decide what the rules should be.
Right.
So it's before we get to plating, which is where we need to, before we get to plat procedures, where we need to focus our legislative, that's where we make policy, right? Not at the time someone's just trying to come in with a project and just trying to follow the rules, presumably.
Right, because then you're prone to subjective interpretation based on political pressures. But you should be focused on capturing the values and the goals of the direction of the community and the rules and all those policies. Councilmember Shepherd?
So what is our policy regarding traffic studies? How old can they be? How far out do they have to be? Do we have those somewhere?
The State Environmental Policy Act governs the reuse of prior
Point of order.
environmental studies. I'm answering the council member's question, and because this came up several times during the Salish expansion, and it specifically says that you must use the environmental reviews that were conducted for the same project. So it doesn't set a time limit, and it doesn't allow the city to say, well, 5 years is too old or 3 years is too old, unless there's actual evidence of actual significant adverse environmental impacts. And the council made findings to that effect in its decision on the Salish.
Councilmember Shepherd?
So the city of Issaquah has a policy regarding traffic studies, and I don't see us having one that's similar to what they have.
Point of order.
Councilmember G?
When a council member brings up what another city does, then it seems to me that I should say what this other city does. And that council member should say, well, but this other city does. I'd encourage us to not give examples of what other people do because they have altogether other circumstances and other histories. Let's focus on what Snoqualmie has done and what Snoqualmie should do.
In fact, often cities reach out and try to look at us as a standard for how things should be done. But, Councilmember Shepherd?
So
Sorry, Councilmember Holloway and Councilmember Shepherd. Round robin.
So we've brought it up a couple of times, so I guess I'm going to react at this stage. We, as well as the hearing examiner, should have an order of consideration and things come before us such that professional judgment takes precedence. You then now get professional opinion, and then you get opinion. And they have a precedence in them. If a opinion stated is contradictory to the professional judgment or opinion, it should be noted, but it doesn't outweigh. And we fall into that mistake frequently. And it'll get us in trouble.
Councilmember Shepherd?
So I'd like to see our city do something more than what's minimally required by state law. And I would like to see us strive for a higher standard than what we've been striving for so far. And so I think that Issaquah's got a better example of how they deal with their traffic studies as far as
Point
the
of order, Mr. Mayor.
definition.
I'm not clear what City of Issaquah's parking traffic studies have to do with plat procedures. I don't follow.
Point sustained. Yeah, if the members could please focus on the subject matter at hand, on the plat procedure specifically.
Mr. Mayor, in the for what it's worth category, the city of Issaquah provides for city hearing examiner final decision on preliminary plats and appeal only to the city council. I was just looking at their code. So for the same type of code provision that you're considering tonight, Mr. Rogers' recommendation is parallel to the city of Issaquah's, for what it's worth.
Councilmember Shepherd?
So I think the point of traffic studies has to do with plats, because how can you determine how much you can build if you don't know whether your infrastructure can support it?
Councilmember Holloway?
So I'd like to make two motions. I'd like to have a motion that selection of hearing examiner come into scope for this change, and I would like a vote of the council.
What does that mean?
Say it again.
So we had questions about how we select the hearing examiner. I would like us to vote whether we want to bring that discussion into effect here or not. And if we vote not, I want to be done with the discussion. If we vote yes, then it's action to staff to go do and figure out how that would work. Okay, but if we keep having discussions and never make a decision, we'll just keep cycling through that discussion. So 2 discussions. One, we've had discussions on hearing examiners, and we've had discussions on time limits for traffic studies. I would like us to take a vote whether we want to consider those in the scope of this change or not. And if not, we move on.
All right. The city clerk needs to capture your motion, so could you now
Okay?
please
So
restate?
motion one, I'd like to move to include the selection of hearing examiner in the scope for this agenda bill. May I have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second to include a hearing as stated by Councilmember Holloway. Any discussion, council? No further discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
No.
Hey,
Okay. Motion
Motion
two,
fails.
I would like to bring into scope for this agenda bill the, what did we just do? Oh, the effective lifespan of traffic studies. May I have a second?
no, wait a minute.
Point of order, is this germane?
I think it's germane insofar as everybody's trying to suss out examples of the efficacy of the council being a decision body or not, or giving it to a hearing examiner. So, whether it's traffic studies or the hearing examiner, I think they're trying to probe as to whether these are things that should weigh on that decision. So I'm gonna allow it.
And in response, honorable council member, no, I don't think it is, and I want to make it not.
But I would just say,
I think
are
we're
we
gonna
in
get there
discussion?
quicker by just having this
There's
motion.
been none but a second.
Has there been a second?
I don't think there's been a second yet. Is
No
there a
second?
second for this motion?
Not yet.
All right.
Not-
Motion dies for lack of a second.
Good.
All right, so both those issues. I would love to have made some comments on the traffic study issue, but it's not even on the floor for debate, so. Any other discussion on this item? All right, with that, it will be coming back in 3 weeks, or the council in 3 weeks. It'll be going back to the committee in a couple weeks, so further discussion there. And council, of course, have more opportunities to discuss it at that time. Jason, thank you very much. All right, with that, we'll move on to reports. Under mayor's report, I'd just note that the council goals and objectives are included in the agenda packet. I don't know if there's any desire for discussion at this time about that. All right, Parks and Public Works Committee report. Is that Sean?
That's Sean.
Who's the co-chair or the second in command?
Your appointed one. One of you two. Rock, paper, scissors?
Rock, paper, scissors?
Any other
report.
report?
No
Okay.
report. Let's just
All
do
right.
it the easy that way.
Community Development Committee.
No report.
Finance Administration Committee, we have warrants, approval of warrants as stated in the agenda packet. Can someone please make a motion?
Move to approve the warrants as stated.
Second?
Second.
A motion and a second to approve the warrants as stated in the agenda packet. Is there any discussion, council? Councilmember Shepherd. Or I'm sorry, I'll turn it to the chair of the F&A committee first.
Again, we had process, opportunity was provided for review of warrants. No questions were brought before the F&A committee. Committee recommends approval of the warrants.
Councilmember Shepherd.
Okay, so I still have one more question. I've had two questions that I've had out for better part of a year. And I did get a response from the first one. They weren't able to answer the question, but I did get a response. I'm still waiting for the second question. And that's why I have pulled this off the consent agenda.
Point of information? Do you have specific concerns in regards to the warrants as presented?
I don't have any that you would consider worthy of discussing.
Or relevant.
I'm
Point of order?
I'm willing to discuss any
Members are supposed
warrant.
to speak to the chair.
Okay. Ask the members to please address their comments to the chair and not debate each other.
Didn't I ask for a point of information?
All right, any other discussion, council, on this item? All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nope.
Motion is carried. All right.
I just saved you.
No, I do want to be.
Any other report for Finance Administration Committee? Councilmember Holloway?
Well, other than back to point of discussion, we requested a list of questions some time ago and have yet to be presented those to committee. So we are willing to accept and discuss those whenever a council member is ready. Other than that, no further report on F&A.
All right, Public Safety Committee report.
No report.
Committee of the Whole Town Hall meeting as requested by Councilmember Jeans. Councilmember Jeans, did you want to cue that up?
The ad hoc committee continues to meet, and our focus is on town hall meetings. We have generally, as a council, agreed to have 4 town hall meetings, essentially quarterly meetings, and we're in the process of planning the second quarterly meeting. And the committee has recommended date, time, and place, and so forth, and the committee has met in committees, in small groups. We've sort of oriented all of you regarding the recommendations of the ad hoc committee. And I think we've had general agreement. So let me just say that the recommendation to you, and I propose, it's for 5/19, which is a Sunday, at 5 p.m. At the Cascade View Elementary School. And the topic generally is the community center expansion with the consideration of adding a pool. So I'm looking for a second on that.
Second.
Motion and second as stated by Councilmember Jeans. Further discussion, Council? Councilmember Lasay?
I think it's important for this council to consider the attendance of all council members at City Hall, at Town Hall discussions, especially regarding anything that might be an agenda bill or a potential ordinance that is passed by this council. I am not available on that date. I will be out of town. I would urge council to reconsider, to not adopt that date for a town hall and look for additional dates.
Councilmember Jeans?
Regarding the date that we have it, or the day of the week that we have it, we're trying to be creative. We're trying to get more people than come to city council meetings. We're trying to get out into the community. We're trying to touch different people, especially with subjects that are on their mind. And I think any proposal of any date is not going to guarantee that every council member is going to be there. Be nice if we had a majority, it'd be nice if we had all of the council, but I think it's sort of impossible to play with the dates that is going to get every council member there, because even if you preliminary decide, then something comes up and you got a conference, you got a trial, you got things going on, some Boeing plane breaks down somewhere, and so things happen, and so I don't think you can get to everyone. So that's my thought.
Councilmember Ross?
And I think this would be a good one to audio tape or videotape so that any council members or any member of the public wants to see it, they can go back and review it.
I'll just interject before I go back to further council comment that as I'm aware, and Councilmember Jeans, you could affirm or not, this was particularly difficult with your commitment to try to do quarterly town hall meetings with Mother's Day and graduation, spending with school and family vacation. It was tough to squeeze in and find a weekend that worked. Councilmember Sunwald did kind of an informal poll out there to suggest what was the most popular times. And
No, we did not.
he did an informal poll, and Sunday seemed to be the most popular time.
He didn't do a comprehensive poll.
Well,
He
it's
didn't
not
ask them. He
scientific.
didn't ask
Councilmember
everybody.
Lasay?
I do not consider a council member posting on Facebook as a poll, when the poll, if you're going to take one with council members, should have asked the council members. I was not at any time asked for a date, and when this date was proposed, I specifically said I was not available, would appreciate the committee, which, by the way, was tasked to develop methods at which we can create greater opportunity and transparency with the community, and not simply to meet to talk about scheduling town halls. I'm extremely frustrated that the mandate that was given to the ad hoc committee to improve transparency has resulted in my belief that it's actually created less transparency because we focused in on only specific issues that are important to those members that are on that committee. Therefore, I move to dissolve the ad hoc committee as currently exists.
Motion dies for lack of a second. Councilmember Shepherd?
Oh, okay. My understanding, well, my understanding of what the meeting is about, it wasn't going to be just one topic.
Right.
And I think that that's where it kind of sounds like if we're just going to talk about one topic, but it was going to maybe last maybe 15 minutes, and then the rest of the time is going to be to whatever residents would like to talk about when they come to the meeting. As far as the topic, I didn't vote for this topic, I just, but I'm one of three, and so I got outvoted.
Councilmember Jeans? Okay, I'm sorry, Councilmember Holloway was before you, doing a little round robin here.
Okay, so I guess just point of information, were there other dates under consideration?
Not really.
There were.
And what were those dates?
That were shared, anybody?
I don't remember right now.
The 16th, the 17th, or 18th, 19th, the weekend before that, the weekend after that? I mean, I was watching some conversation with quite a few dates.
I guess also point, I'm going to use this till the dog dies. Point of information to my fellow council member, would he like to make a motion for a different date?
I'd move to request that the ad hoc committee consider additional dates, including potentially putting a doodle poll or some other method for polling council members on when they are available.
Second.
Motion and a second.
Point of order. I'm not sure the council can make a collective decision by doodle poll. Bob?
Or any other method necessary.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Lissay, could you please repeat your motion?
I move that the council considers additional dates for potential town halls so that all council members can attend.
All right. And Councilmember Shepherd, you second that motion?
Yeah, what is the rule?
No, just a second. Don't need a commentary. Okay, there's been a motion, a second, motion's on the table. Any further discussion on the
Well,
motion?
again, point of order. I'm not sure that we can have a non-public communication go out asking for a council decision. Like, one council member can ask all of us a question and collect that answer. But you can't orchestrate an email conversation that says, let's make a decision 16th, 17th, 18th, pick it, we're done.
He's not asking them to pick
Not
another
asking.
date. He's asking them to consider it, to look for another date that works for everybody. If not, it's going
Yes.
to default back to the 19th. That's how I understood it. Is that correct, Councilmember?
That is
Lissay?
correct.
Okay.
Okay.
Point of
And a
information.
doodle poll is simply a tool that can be used to do that, to achieve that result. So,
Is there any rule that says a council member can't send the other council members a doodle poll?
no, the staff will facilitate that.
No. Staff could do that. A council member could send a doodle poll.
Thank you.
Councilmember Holloway's talking about, can council members decide collectively via email which days they want to meet and which
We
they
cannot make
don't,
council
but-
decisions
So,
via email.
And I
Two
wasn't
different
asking for one.
things.
Asking for consideration of a different date.
Councilmember Ross.
So it sounds like one person can't make it. Can the rest of the council members attend May 19th at 5 PM? My concern is that if we look at other dates, I mean, there's all types of things that are coming up, especially during the summer, that not everyone's going to be able to make it.
And someone else can't make it, or maybe two other
Right.
people can't make it, yeah. Councilmember Lissay and then Councilmember Shepherd.
I guess my point of the motion is that there was never any consideration given to any other dates, maybe one around the one that was there, and there was no attempt to inquire with all council members on other dates that might be possible. So having been a council member that was not contacted about alternate dates, I can say that not all council members were contacted.
Councilmember Shepherd, then Councilmember Jeans.
What Matt Lissay said.
Councilmember
I agree with
Jeans?
that.
Actually, we did consider all kinds of other dates, and those dates sort of melted away because of conflicts. But, I'd be happy to go back to the committee. One of the frustrations is we're trying to pick a date and a location, and it's kind of frustrating because we need to give the school, if we're going to pick the location of the school, we've got to give them enough lead time. So we almost can't pick dates short of this meeting. We have to pick dates beyond this meeting, and dates beyond this meeting get so frustrated in that there are so many things that are in relation to school and vacation and other events that are taking place in early June and thereafter. But we.
All right, and just before warn the staff, per the request of the committee members, to send out a you know, because the sense was there's urgency, this is not much time before that meeting, please get notice out to the public that that will be taking place on the 19th. Yeah, Joan, if you could speak. So we'll keep it out there until, and we'll
I
try to.
didn't send that yet.
You didn't?
No. I wanted to wait till after this meeting.
Oh, you're so wise, okay.
She's learned.
All right, there's a one.
They had a motion and a second, but they didn't vote.
Councilmember Mayhew.
So I am very sensitive to a particular council member's frustration at not being able to attend this particular date. I am. Having said that, I've just been looking up the odds of 7 people finding a particular Sunday out of 52 that they can all meet, and they're extraordinarily low. So the odds are pretty good that one of us is going to get, you know, one or more of us can have a problem with just about any date.
I think all Councilmember Lissay
think we just have
is
to
requesting is
understand.
that we at least take a shot at seeing if the.
I'm just trying to get that out. I'm just saying that we all have to understand. Let me say, he'll pick
Councilmember
you next.
Lissay?
I'm halfway through my sentence.
Oh, I'm sorry. My bad. Go ahead, Councilmember Mayhew. Continue.
So.
I heard a pause.
There's this hand waving in front of me that distracted me. So I just think we need to understand, it's going to be tough to get us all there. When we did a coffee and we had 5 of us, which I was very surprised we even got that. You know, that's not meaning to say that we can't, you know, try one more time at this date. But we may not come up with a better date. And one thing I've heard floated, I don't know by who, is, well, if we can't find a date for 4 months, then don't have a town hall for 4 months. And I don't agree with that. I think we should have these town halls. Let's have them every quarter at least. And there's no magic to every quarter. It just feels about right to me. So that's my comment.
Thank you. And my apologies again for interrupting. Councilmember Lissay.
I just want to clarify that the motion is related to finding an alternate date. It seems again to be a bit arbitrary that it's been decided that a Sunday must be the day. We found a way to get everybody together on a Saturday. We find ways to get everybody together on a Monday. We find ways to get everybody together on a Thursday. I don't think an attempt has really been made to do that. I understand the idea and the ideals, and I believe in those ideals of having participation by as many people as we can. I understand that it's important to have the public engage and receive information from the public, whether that's on a Monday or a Thursday or a Saturday or a Sunday or any other day that ends in Y. I think that this deserves an attempt to at the very least, have all council members present, especially considering that it's been put out there that the primary discussion is around an expansion of the community center, which is a policy item that all council members should participate in.
So if I could suggest maybe a solution.
Councilmember Jeans.
So I don't think we need to vote on this. I don't know if there's a motion to vote on this.
There's a motion on the
But Peggy and
floor.
I will go back and try to find another date, and so will Sean. So we'll give it another try, and we're sorry some of you feel left out of the process.
That sounds kind of like you're calling the question.
No, we're not.
I'm saying it's not,
Never made a
It's
decision.
been seconded, so I
We've
guess
never
we have to vote.
decided
I'm
on a
sorry,
date.
Councilmember Shepherd. Councilmember Mayhew, you were next.
I was going to suggest, and if we need a motion, fine, but I was going to suggest that we, that's okay. I was going to suggest that we ask city staff to facilitate a doodle poll, try and find over the next 30 days or
Are we
so,
just trying to doodle us, the council, or doodle the public?
just us.
And we're
Just us
just trying
seven.
to pick a date.
See if we can find a date over the next 30
Council
days or
members can
so.
refrain from discussion or debate with each other.
Yes, good point.
I'm sorry.
Someone made that point, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yes. That we pick a date, or that we look for a date over the next 30 days, but that we trust the committee to pick the best date you can come up with, and then proceed. But use city staff and try to find something all 7 of us can be at.
Sounds like a good way to wrap this up, put a bow on it and make.
Oh, so I move that.
It's already been moved. We're
Oh,
in
all
discussion.
right.
What you just said.
I'm suggesting we're starting to repeat ourselves. So, yeah, I know you guys are determined to take it to 9 o'clock, but I think this discussion's been exhausted. Are we ready for a vote? All right, all those in favor?
Wait, what do we vote?
We're voting on this motion to just take the time to go back with a doodle poll or whatever, look for another date that could work for all 7, and if not, we still default to the 19th. Councilman Rossi is not looking for a guarantee, he's just saying, could you please make the effort?
Correct.
Okay? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion is carried. All right, with that, I think we're coming up on staff reports, which are not written this time of the month, if I can find the agenda here again. Any other reports from staff? Tia, do you have anything? Chief? Dan? Jason, I don't see Mark here, so you're speaking for him.
Chairperson, or Chairman? We had a discussion item under Committee of the Whole
Goals and objectives.
that we didn't close out.
Oh, I thought I opened it up under mayor's report, but I'll
Oh, okay.
let me just wrap this up first. PJ? Robert? Deborah? Joan? Bob?
I actually do have one. I want to report back on a council meeting I attended in North Bend last Tuesday night, along with Chief Perry Phipps and Captain Almquist. We were in front of the council with their agenda bill to consider the police services contract. And I thought it went rather well. If you want more detail, you can certainly ask Chief Phipps. But that council voted unanimously. 2 members were absent, but I understood they would have also voted yes. But the 5 that were there voted yes on an extension of our existing agreement for 6 years. So that'll come back to the Public Safety Committee in 2 weeks, and then it'll be considered with the council on May 13th.
All right, thank you, Bob. Bob? All right.
Good job, Chief.
Okay, so we'll come back to Committee of the Whole and pick up that item on the, and I'm sorry, Council, I thought I raised that issue. I was kind of surprised there was no discussion when I said during Mayor's report, the council goals and objectives are included in the agenda packet. Is there any discussion? And didn't get a reaction, but, so let's go ahead and, any discussion at this point?
I would not.
Councilmember Ross.
Are there more definite plans for each one of these? I mean, like ongoing efforts, 2019, 2020, or, I don't know, just, it seems like there's not a lot of detail there for the timeline. I thought we were supposed to like smart the objectives.
It had been discussed. I wasn't sure we had affirmatively agreed to all that, but the staff certainly wants to give a high-level review to council. And they'll obviously, as they get into these, they're going to present more detail on each of these as they present them. But we're trying to make it so it's readable and concise.
And when you're going to present them then, or how does that work?
As we roll them out to each of the various committees, we're going to start with your, you've ranked or prioritized the 27 objectives, and staff is going to dig in and start doing those based on the timelines that were given there. We'll be bringing them back accordingly to the particular council committee, or if it's a board or commission, or if it's a full body of the council, whatever the case may be.
All right, if there's no further, Councilman to say?
I do want to make a point. Mr. Larson, thank you for getting these out. I also agree with the council member that more detail is needed. There was discussion around smarting the objectives and identifying items related to each one that would be more of a process, and several of them, are underneath the title of timeline, but don't really have a timeline along with that. They just have a statement. I'd encourage staff to incorporate these into upcoming committee meetings and have each committee review the goals that are applicable to those committees, and any goals that are not applicable to an individual committee be reviewed by a committee of the whole, and we dive into them and figure out who they are. And I think we know where we want to go, we know we want to get there. We need to be able to give staff clear and concise direction on what that is.
Okay, if there's no further discussion on this item, then we'll,
just have.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Maybe I'm just missing something here. I'm confused about what happens next. Is this just, do we just file this and start over for next year? Or like, I just don't understand what happens next. It all seems very nebulous to me.
You want to speak to that?
Sorry if I'm being dense. I'm not following, that's all. I'm not trying to pick at you guys. I'm not trying to pick at you.
This is what the staff and administration uses to guide you start. You might not be aware of just all the conversations that take place, back on the administrative side of it, but, through the year, you should start seeing actions that pertain to most all these goals.
And so is that what there was this reference to committee, so will we start hearing reports at committee level, or kind of, I'm just trying to have a sense of what happens.
Sure. Maybe I can give you by example what we're talking about. I'm trying to find it. It's number 1, goal 1. Could you go to the detail under goal 1 for the objectives? I believe there was a committee that started discussing, I don't know which one it was, maybe it was ranked number 1, the objective number 2, the tourism plan. I think that committee has already started that process.
So I guess by way of where I'm getting confused, if you look at objective number 1, so it says that this plan is supposed to be developed, and the timeline just says a plan will happen. I sort of don't know when, who will see it, how will we see it? I just sort of left wondering, what does that mean?
Well, that one in particular says the 5-year forecast is updated annually. So it'll be a rolling 5-year forecast. There's going to be more detail applied to that. But I don't think you'd want to see the detail in this type of a plan when it's going to be, it could be a white paper as an example.
Okay, all right.
But I think I would want to see third quarter every year, second quarter every year. When can I expect the first one to come out? And what to schedule thereafter?
Okay.
I'm kind of looking for the milestone definitions under the objective and when we might think those come into effect.
Well, it's this 5-year forecast updated annually. I would see that as part of the budget process. As you know, Councilmember Holloway, oftentimes we did the long-range fiscal forecasting as part of the initial budget conversations to
Either for or at the
to sort
beginning
of
of the
set,
budget process.
set the foundation for where we're at and where we're headed. And we haven't, we've stumbled through that in the last few years not to have that clarity, but I think we're getting back to where.
And I think I agree with you. That's not what that says.
Develop basic long-range revenue models and present to council with the present state and near future forecast. Timeline 5-year forecast updated annually, so you will see it annually. I guess you want specificity on which month annually, or?
Thereabouts or prior to the start of budget deliberations. Excuse me, my mouth broke halfway through that. Okay, so, September timeframe, we ought to be seeing something.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Yeah, if we're not going to see anything until September, we're in deep trouble. For example, we didn't get this as part of this past, the budget cycle we're still in the middle of because we haven't passed the capital budget yet. We saw multiple versions of a chart that had some lines on it. I have no idea what numbers were behind those, what assumptions were behind them, and there was multiple versions of it. So I would think, and when I read the objective, I get, and I suspect this is what we're all saying the same thing. We're just not, but I would expect that under objective 1, we're going to have something that lays out our major revenue categories, kind of builds in what our inflator assumptions are, or we're using what the state uses, or we're using what the county, like what are the basis of our projections, and kind of come up with a 5-year forecast that then we all kind of say, okay, yeah, that is now something we're all bought into, and then we just refer to that going forward.
Mayor,
Could I just?
I would prefer not to debate these at the moment.
Yeah, I'm not trying to debate it. I'm just trying to
We're just going to
clarify.
get into too much discussion. Yes, you will see all of that.
Okay.
And you did have that actually as part of the last budget discussion. We can go back and refer to it if you like, but there was all types of barometers, and you actually had a debate with the finance director about some of those issues, about where we actually got those forecasts, what we were using. King County,
Went through every slide today, and there's no such slide in there.
King County versus the state versus
I
the
disagree
national.
with Councilmember Mayhew.
Well, it's factual.
Let's just,
I'm not debating with
disagree.
staff. Please, point of order,
Let's-
Mayor. I'm not debating with staff.
Robert, just,
I accept your answer, but I'm just saying, if your answer is that's already done, then we have a problem, because I don't believe it's done.
So can we,
that is not my answer.
I didn't
Mayor,
think so.
I would not rather prefer not to debate these tonight. We can certainly get into the detail at appropriate time, but this is not the time to do this.
can we take the discussion of this to F&A and probably come back again and, we got a Monday off coming up in
I would
3 weeks.
encourage each committee to take the
Yeah,
sections of these that pertain to the committees.
That's what we expect to do once we got them ranked. You got 27 objectives. They've been split up. We've got the lead, if you will, the assignments. If it's Robert Hamud, he's the finance director, that clearly would be in the F&A committee. And I certainly have not exhausted that discussion, not by any means.
So will each committee then take some time out in the coming week to run through these? I still would like to collect feedback into the F&A for an overall look and bring it back to council in 3 weeks. Is that acceptable? Is it, let me ask you different, is that not acceptable? See, you all got quiet on me?
It's fine with me.
Thank you, Maggie. All right.
Acceptable.
So staff will, again, put an agenda item on each committee to review the appropriate goals and objectives within their wheelhouse, if I can steal your term tonight.
All right, if there's no further on this, then are there any other reports before concluding tonight? Announcements? All right, with that, there be no further business coming for the council, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second to adjourn tonight's meeting. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. Meeting is over.
It's not 7:30 anymore, is it?
No, it's not, Alice.